a show of hands, who was here last week or the week before? All right. So welcome back, and welcome to everybody that's new. Hopefully you found the links to the prior 2 weeks. If you didn't do it, I sent out a parent square notice this morning, and in that flyer are the links. When we get the link to the third one, Mr. Martineau will send it all out in one newsletter in one of his Friday updates. So probably next Friday we'll have the link to all 3 of the recordings, so you can go back to them just so you can refresh your memory and we're all saying the right things and we're not butting or shooting our kids to death, right? So tonight, we're all just wondering what that number 1 skill is that we need, that all parents need to have, that probably none of us really do. We're all like, oh, I understand. I'm sure you're sad. But there's better things to say, and we're all going to learn those right things to say. So from here on out, with all the removing the buts from our conversations, our emails, removing the shoulds from our conversations and emails, removing the I understand from all of our conversations and emails, we're going to have a whole list of things we can say that will validate. Is that right? Okay, good, perfect. So for those of you who haven't been here, this is Karrie Toole. She's a licensed social worker. She is the director or something. It's something, some bigwig at Castlebrook Counseling. She is great. She's been keeping us all engaged and teaching us everything we ever wanted to know about parenting. My children are grown adults, and I have grandchildren, so I'm learning all the things I did wrong. So hopefully you'll learn all the things to do right with your own kids. These presentations were made possible by the Southborough Board of Health. Dr. Heather Alker is here, the health department. She's the director of the Southborough Health Department. Taylor West is the assistant director and public health nurse in Southborough. So it was by their kindness and generosity that it was possible for Karrie to be here with us the past 3 weeks. I also wanted to let you know that to continue the conversation, Southborough Youth and Family Services offers some workshops called Listen with Love and Say It with Love that will help you build on the skill. All the skills that Karrie's talked about, these 2 programs will help you build on those skills. So they are offered. There are flyers on the table when you leave here that have all the information you might need. So without further ado, here you go, Karrie. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this rainy evening. I'm very excited to share tonight's information. This is going to be about the number 1 skill that parents really need to know, and it's not just for your kids, it's for every human interaction you have from here on out, that this will benefit you in those interactions. So, before we get into that, how'd it go from last week? Who tried some stuff? I saw a thumbs up. I saw hands. Yeah, improvements. Yeah, what did people try? Shout it out. And taking the butt out and replacing with and. Nice. Did your kid look at you like you had 3 heads? It was okay. Yeah, they're going to do that at first. It's okay. They're like, you're being weird, right? Yeah. And then it keeps the conversation going. Their ears stay open, right? Anything else? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So that idea that a mistake is not just something to kind of like say, okay, mistakes were made and move on, to sit in it and say, okay, this is an experience. We're learning. Right. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so he went from fear of making a mistake to being able to be open and curious and learning and talking about having a mistake, right? And that it's an opportunity. That's fantastic. Oh, yay! Nicely done. So excited. Awesome. All right, so Did people try to describe emotions that their kids were having or they were having, changing the narrative from bad to or negative to something more like painful or uncomfortable? Did people try those? Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. And well received, hopefully? Yeah. Yep. So now we don't have the painful emotion and then a layer of shame on top of it, right? Because when we hear, something's a bad emotion or it's a negative emotion, kids will think that, oh no, that means I shouldn't be feeling this, right? So then they feel angry and then they feel guilty or shameful about having anger or sadness or whatever it is, right? Awesome. How was it sitting with discomfort? Like letting your kid be uncomfortable for a little bit. It's kind of cringy, as the kids say, right? Yeah, uncomfortable. And what happened? Did you get more out of them? Did they keep talking? Right? Did it not blow up? Fantastic, right? That's the goal, right? Showing them that we can handle discomfort, that we're not uncomfortable with discomfort. We'll let them see that we can be open to even more uncomfortable conversations as they get older, right? So if they're picking up when they're younger that we're uncomfortable with certain things, then they're not going to bring the big stuff to us. So we got to be able to show them that we're okay with being uncomfortable and talking about uncomfortable things, right? Because there's going to be a time where it's really going to get uncomfortable. And who do you want them to go to? Their friends? They might, right? But if we show them that we can sit with discomfort and be uncomfortable with them, then they're more likely to bring those things to us too, right? All right. And not fixing the problem right away. Yeah, how'd it go? Thumbs up? Yeah, right? That's exciting, right? Because they get used to this, like, okay, I need to make this go away. I need to fix it. I need to find the solution. What I'm feeling is wrong, right? So when we let them just like sit in it, and we're going to talk about that more tonight, right? We're learning from it. We're getting comfortable with what our system is telling us our values are, right? And that's really important. They're developing a sense of what their values are and who they are. And they're not going to know these things unless they sit in this uncomfortable stuff from time to time, right? Because those are lessons to be learned. Those are experiences to be had. And if we just try to rush through and fix them, they're not going to feel it. They're not going to get a sense of where the discomfort lies and why, right? Do we go toward the uncomfortable things and stop walking on eggshells? That one's hard because sometimes it feels like we're like, we're rocking the boat or we're poking the bear, right? We're like, oh no, I don't want to talk about this because it's going to cause a disruption, right? So it's hard. And also it's that sense of showing them that we're okay talking about uncomfortable things. They will bring it to us, and it won't be so much of a explosion, right? And reinforcing the positive, did we catch them being good, so to speak, right? Did we reinforce the behaviors we want to see more of? Yeah? Fantastic. You don't even have to tell them that you're doing it. It's so fun, a little devious and fun, right? Fantastic. Okay, so our final night together, I'm going to teach folks specifics about the skill of validation, right? And so this is something that we learn very concretely in therapy school. And I'm going to teach you some of the tricks and the hacks that I've learned, not just through those, the years of training, but also in my practice specifically with kids and suicidal and self-harming teens and young adults, right? So they need a lot of validation and a lot of skills. So before we get too far in, I'm saving some time for questions toward the end. If you're watching on live stream, feel free to text some questions to me. I've got my work cell over here, 508 439-3911 is my work cell, so feel free to text any messages there. So I'll take questions from there and questions from here, save a little time at the end. All right, okay. So validation is not always what people think. So when I talk with a lot of parents about, okay, we're going to talk about how to validate your kids, they're like, I already do that. Does that mean that I have to like just give in to them or agree with what they're saying? But half the time what they're doing is not what I want them to do. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's not validation, right? So what validation is, so it's the number one strategy that I use and most of my colleagues use to get ourselves, even in therapy, sometimes we get stuck with someone in the room with us that we're like, oh, okay, like we're kind of in a stuck place where I'm offering suggestions and they're, shooting me down with everything I'm trying to say. So clearly we're stuck at some point. What's my strategy? It's not to continue offering more suggestions. How many times have we been in the situation where you're trying to coach your kid and like, okay, let's try this, try this. And they're like, that's not going to work because of this. That's not going to work because of that, right? They shoot down every suggestion you make, right? We've been there, right? So that's the key when you're kind of like, oh my gosh, what can I offer them? That's the cue to say, all right, I got to switch gears and go into the strategy of validation. Because problem solving, we're not there yet. It's a timing thing. If we rush past validation and try to get to problem solving faster, they're getting the message that, okay, let's just not feel these things and let's fix it, right? And we talked about that last week, not trying to fix it, right? So validation, when we're in this kind of like, struggle with our kids, right? With, people in our families, with people at work, people at the grocery store, right? When we're in that kind of like, that conflict, the key to sidestepping it all is starting with validation, okay? So it's the number one skill to get ourselves and our kids unstuck. It's the number one skill to reduce emotional intensity, right? So when we are interacting with a kid or with a colleague or with a family member and the things are really heated, they're loaded for bear, as we say in Maine, right? Things are on blast, right? This is the intervention to bring the emotional intensity down so we can actually have a conversation again. We're not just yelling and screaming at each other or stomping away frustrated or angry, right? So this will bring the emotions down, right? Reduce the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system. We're getting out of that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And we're getting into the place where the rest of our brains, if you were here the first week and we talked about how brains, when the amygdala and the fight or flight is going and the sympathetic nervous system is going, there's not an opportunity for logical conversations in that state, right? So bringing the emotions down using validation will then open things up for dialogue. It opens their ears, I like to say, right? When we're able to validate, their ears open up again to what we actually are trying to say, right? Okay. So, and therefore, it's the number one skill to really improve communication, right? And we are social beings. We are pack animals, us humans. So anyone we're having communication with, this is going to be a beneficial technique, all right? So what is validation? What is not validation? So validation is really just the acknowledgement of someone's emotions. It's not saying I agree with you or yes, fine, you can have, sugar, like straight sugar for breakfast. You can have chocolate cake for breakfast, right? It's not saying like, yeah, go ahead, you do that. It's not giving permission for certain things. What it is saying like, I hear that you are frustrated right now. So we're talking about the emotion, not the behavior, right? So it's acknowledgement, it's recognizing It's naming the emotions in the room. Okay? Nothing more than that. It's all it really needs to be. Okay? So what that teaches our kids is that what we're doing is we're communicating to our kids that their emotions make sense in the situation as they see it. Right? So we're putting ourselves in their shoes and saying, yeah, of course, if you thought that so-and-so was talking about you behind your back when you know that's not really what happened, right? But if they perceived that that was something that happened, of course they'd be upset, right? If we try to jump in and say, no, that's not what happened, right? Then we're negating their experience, right? They need to just feel mad about it for a little bit, and that's okay, right? And their ears are closed. They're in the sympathetic nervous system. So we got to just kind of ride out the emotions and say, yeah, oh, yeah, of course, if you perceived that this was the situation at hand, yeah, I'd be mad too, right? So let's just be mad about it for a little bit. Then the emotions come down, the ears open up, and then you're able to say, like, I heard this information from so-and-so, or, here's what I saw. What do you think about that? Right? And to introduce the information that might change their perspective. We can't do that when they're here because they're not going to hear it. Right? We need to let the emotions come down and then bring the other information in. So to tell our kids that their emotions make sense from their perspective. Right? So really just putting ourselves in their shoes. Validation is not agreeing with them. Yeah, that kid's a jerk. No, we're not doing that. Yeah, you should just go in and, just skateboard down the hallways and do whatever you want. No, we're not saying that, right? We're not agreeing with them about what they think they should do in response or how things really went, right? So we're not saying, yes, absolutely, we'll never talk to this kid again. No, that's not the thing, right? Looking at the emotions, not the behaviors, right? We're not approving of what's going on necessarily, right? We can be frustrated about how they're handling a situation as a parent, right? And really wish they had handled it differently, and still validate their perspective and then bring in some tools and techniques and suggestions once the emotions come down about how to handle it differently, right? If they blew up at school, we're not going to say, oh, yeah, you were mad. You had every right to yell at the teacher. I'm okay with that. That's not validation. That's saying, to be validating in that situation would be saying something more like, of course you were mad. Yeah, you got a crummy grade and you weren't expecting that. Yeah, of course you were mad. And we'll talk about how we're going to apologize to your teacher later. That behavior is not acceptable. The emotions make sense. The behaviors are not acceptable. Is how we draw the line, right? So, and then if we get into problem solving too quickly, they perceive it again as an invalidation, that they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, that we should just rush through it so we don't have to feel it anymore because it's bad or it's wrong or it's negative, right? So letting them learn that their emotions make sense in the context that they're in is going to help them really internalize the message of, okay, I can listen to my system to tell me what is right for me, what my values are. And if they learn somehow to just fly through discomfort to not feel it and just fix it, they're not going to get those messages internalized. All right? So, why do we validate? The kids feel heard. Isn't it nice when you feel heard by someone? Right? Even if they're not agreeing with you. When someone says, oh yeah, I can see where you're coming from. This is what you're saying, right? This is your perspective. They might still disagree with you, but at least if you know that you've been heard and acknowledged, That feels really respectful, right? And you can have a dialogue. You can have a discussion, right? If your kid is or if you have anyone else in your life who is a repeater, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, right? If they just keep repeating the same thing over and over again, even though you thought like the situation was over and done with, means they're not feeling heard, right? So if you've got someone in your, world that does that repeating thing, validation is number one intervention, to show them that you hear them. You don't agree with them, but you hear them, right? Or if someone who gets louder, right? Maybe you didn't hear me last time, so I'm going to get louder about it, right? That person also is not feeling heard. So validation is the key to show people we hear them, even if we have a different perspective, different opinion, right? So can be done with anyone, not just our kids. It de-escalates conflict and intense emotions, right? So it takes that kind of sense of, me versus you out of the realm of the discussion, right? It brings the emotions down. It says we're on the same team. I hear what you're saying. We're going to have a dialogue versus I'm right, you're wrong, right? Allows everyone to listen to their own internal emotional cues, right? It's going to teach them to really tune into their gut, right? And there will be a point where they are launched in some way, shape, or form, and they're going to be navigating the world like solo, not entirely solo, right? We'll be here. And they're going to have to learn to listen to what their own internal cues are trying to tell them about these situations that they're facing, where they might have a choice or a dilemma, right? And if they're not knowing how to validate their own experience, they might learn the hard way. I mean, they're going to learn the hard way anyway, right? But they might really learn the hard way again and again and again, right? And it increases connection. Validation increases connection, and that's what we really want with our kids, right? Okay. So it also teaches that emotions are actually helpful. And we talked about this last week, that emotions are not a bad thing, right? Painful emotions are our biggest teachers, right? When we stub our toe, I gave that example last week, right? The pain tells us something about the situation we're in. And if we ignore that pain, we're going to stay stuck in a particular situation. So when we're able to say to our kids, yeah, you're angry, you're hurt, you feel betrayed, and teach them that it's okay to feel those things, right? The emotions will give them a lesson about who they are and what they feel is right for them, right? So they're helpful. Painful emotions, they're trying to do a job, right? And so when we validate them, when we teach our kids to listen to them when they're whispering those painful emotions, right? When those emotions are whispering and we tune into them, they're not going to end up screaming at us, right? And a lot of clients come to me in therapy when they've ignored the whispering emotions for so long. They're like, nope, I don't hear it. Nope, I'm fine. I got this. Until the emotions, like kind of like that person that we have arguments with, right? If they're not feeling heard, they get louder and repeat, right? The emotions do the exact same thing internally to us, right? So if we've been ignoring it and putting it off and not paying attention to it, it's going to scream in order for us to pay attention, right? That's when kids come to me for therapy, right? So, especially the painful emotions are trying to protect us, right? So, in a lot of the work that I do with teaching kids emotion regulation skills, and my own kids at home too, we practice thanking the painful emotion. Thank you, shame, for telling me that this situation doesn't align with my values. Thank you, anger, for getting me prepared to address something or for standing up for an injustice. Thank you, sadness, for telling me what's important to me, right? All of these painful emotions have a job to do. Emotions evolved before language did in the human brain, right? It's how we communicate with each other without using words. We can do that, right? I think I said last time, I've had whole like emoji and, meme conversations with my sisters, right? Just in terms of like emotional expressions, facial expressions, right? Don't kids do that on Snapchat? Like they just like take a picture of themselves having a reaction and send it to kids. Like I don't get the Snapchat, but so we need to pay attention to these emotions. They're trying to guide us. Avoiding the emotions causes suffering. Validating the emotions brings peace. Right? So I use an analogy a lot in the office working with kids about validating our emotions and accepting our emotions even when they're painful. The analogy is we've all kind of touched something hot before, right? And if we were to ignore the pain that comes when we touch something hot, right? And we say, nope, I'm fine, I can handle this, I've got this, it's fine, I can handle it. Our hands are gonna burn into a tiny nub, right? They're gonna burn up and fall off. We're suffering. It's when we say, ouch, that hurts, and accept the pain of the emotion, that's the thing that allows us to move. That's the thing that allows us to react, to do something different, to make a change, right? Accepting that this situation is painful. How many times have we as adults gone through and said, nope, this is fine, I can handle it, and you stop and you reflect and you pause and you say, oh, this isn't working, right? So we're teaching the kids how to do that too by accepting pain, right? Sounds fabulous, doesn't it? Sounds like such a great time, right? What it teaches us as well, teaches us our values, like I was talking about before. Our emotions will tell us what's important to us, what we feel is right for us, what we value, and what we don't value. Everybody's got different values, right? We do work at the office where we actually have a list of like 10, 12 different values, different types of values for the kids. In the adult groups, it's actually something like 50 different values, right? And we have people score which values for themselves are most important to them, right? And then we kind of coach them to make decisions about like the everyday interactions they're having and the circumstances they're in, and kind of reflect back on those values about what's really important to me. And you're not going to know that unless you know with comfort what your system is telling you about validating your emotions. How do I feel when I'm in this kind of a situation and I make this choice versus that choice? What's my system telling me, right? And we're teaching them how to do that through validation, right? So we have to start that process with them. It's not a automatic thing, especially for kids with the high emotional sensitivity superpower. They've actually taught themselves to not listen to their cues because the world tells them you're too much, or you're too dramatic, you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, right? So they've shut those puppies down, right? So we got to get them tuned back into what their systems are trying to teach them. They're just screaming all the time instead of whispering, right? So when we teach them how to do these validation techniques about the emotions that they have, over time, they will internalize it, right? So a lot of my clients will talk about how they were in a situation out in the world, and they're like, and then I heard your voice in my mind, right? About like, what should I say to validate myself right now? And I'm like, that's fantastic. Eventually, it will be your voice instead of mine. And that's when I know like they're good, right? When it's their own voice validating themselves, not mine, right? They've internalized that. So it builds that practice of self-validation, and that's really key. It builds flexibility and resilience, right? This is the whole reason why we're here, how to build resilient kids, right? So when we practice validation, we're actually building that prefrontal cortex part of our brain because we're sitting with and we're reflecting upon the experience we're having. So we're not just reacting to it to try to stop it or make it go away or like deal with whatever's happening. We're building up the brain's ability to pause, to analyze, to tune in, to consider, to look at possible outcomes, to look at what's being left out. What am I missing? Right? All of that builds that prefrontal cortex part of the brain, right? So validation builds their brains, right? It also builds that tolerance around discomfort, right? Like, okay, my system is telling me that I'm not liking what's happening right now. I'm uncomfortable with this social situation or how I'm being treated. Fantastic. We want them to learn those things, right? So it helps them to increase mindfulness, being able to be present and experience things, willingness, being willing to like have difficult conversations, being willing to hear things that they maybe don't want to hear, do things that maybe they don't want to do, right? Willingness versus willfulness, right? Helps them build confidence, right? I know what I'm feeling, so I know how to navigate these different situations. And openness, right? Being open to hearing other perspectives, being open to having conversations, right? When they are able to validate their own selves because we've taught them how to, then they're going to be more open as they interact with people in the world in different situations, right? So fantastic, that's what we want. Okay, so I love to teach validation strategies in different levels. There are different levels of validation interventions, right? And like these are, I forget if I talked about in one of the previous ones where I used to work in residential treatment centers, and I used to like be the person on call when a kid is having a really big explosive event, and I would be the person to come in and kind of talk them down, right? Now, I'm wearing 4-inch heels right now, so, you know, I fool people into thinking I'm taller than I am. I'm 5'1" on a good day, right? And here I am, little old me, right out of grad school, right, walking in to a situation where, you know, a 260-pound, 6'3", 17-year-old boy is punching holes in walls because they're mad about something. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna validate this kid. And that's the thing that works though, right? So there were a lot of different interventions that the program would teach us to do and that we kind of picked up along the way. The thing that works every time is validation, right? Because the behaviors are coming from somewhere. So let's ignore the behaviors for right now and talk about the feelings and acknowledge the feelings. And that brings the behavior, like they would stop in their tracks. They'd be mid-punch and I'd be like, this totally sucks. Of course you're angry. I'm furious on your behalf. This really sucks. You had your hopes up for this, home visit to happen, and they pulled the rug out from under you. I'd be pissed if I were you. And they'd be like, yeah. Right? And then we're going to have a conversation. Right? But if I come in there all like, you need to stop doing that thing, and haven't we told you, and you have done this 15 times, and now you're grounded, and blah, 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 blah. Now we're just going to have a bigger fight. Right? So if we come in and we address the emotions first, the behaviors dissipate. And here's how we do it. So the first level of validation is really just, honest to goodness, stay awake. Right? Stay present. Be in the room. Right? If you've got your phone with you, put it down and physically move away from it, You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to have magic words. None of those things need to happen, right? The most basic level of validation is bearing witness, right? Being present, sitting with them and holding space for them to have their emotion, not trying to rush them through, not trying to fix it, sitting with them in it, right? Now, we've been on the receiving end of that before, right? Where we're feeling really upset and we don't know what's going on. We're raging or sad or crying, whatever, right? Nobody's going to have the magic words to make us feel better, right? So it's that person that comes and they just sit with us and they just listen, right? Or just hold space. That can feel really comforting, right? It keeps the pressure off of us to try to explain why we feel how we feel. With kids, they don't know. Especially starting in middle school, they start hitting that puberty. They don't know what's going on in their brains. It's a whole new ball game. They have no idea. It's really scary in there, right? They don't know why they're feeling what they're feeling. So to try to come up with an explanation when we ask them questions, it's just going to increase the frustration, right? So just sit. I had a parent group that I was running a few years ago, and I had a mom who was 100% a fixer. And she wanted to just make her kids be the happiest kids, and it stressed her out so much that her kids weren't happy, and how was she going to fix it? And she was doing thing after thing after thing, and it upset her. Am I not a good mom because my kids are struggling, right? All these self-invalidations that were happening. And we were talking about these levels of validation, and I said to her, we're not going to next time your kid's struggling, go in her room, sit on the corner of her bed, and don't say a word. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads, right? And she did it that week. She said it took everything, every fiber of her energy to not try to jump in and tell her kid what she thought the kid needed to do in the situation. The kid was sobbing in the bed, just having a big old meltdown. And she went in and she just sat on the edge of the bed and she just was present, right? Not a word. Just let her kid have her emotions. And then the mom said, and then there was this shift of energy in the room. My kid took a deep breath and then paused for a second and then sat up and started talking. And she was like, holy crap, it worked! Right? It took a good 20 minutes. And she was like, that was the worst 20 minutes of my life. And I'm like, I know, right? And look what happened, right? You had a conversation. Your kid knew that you were just holding space for them to have their emotions, and that's okay, right? Make sense? Yes. A little bit torturous. It is. It is, right? And it works. So just being present. Put the phone away. Don't, if somebody's calling for you in the other room, to say, I'll be with you in a few minutes, right? Just be fully present. Okay? The next level of validation, and we're going to see if the YouTube video works. Nonverbal cues, nonverbal communication. All right? I think I might have said this in one of the previous ones. How much communication happens through only the words that we use? Does anybody remember that number? 7%. Only 7% of communication is happening through our actual words, right? Everything else is nonverbal. How we're holding ourselves, the facial expressions we have, the pace at which we're speaking, the volume at which we're speaking, right? The cadence, what syllable we're putting emphasis on. All those things, like, oh, that's what you're wearing is very different than, oh, that's what you're wearing, right? It's the same words, right? Totally different context, right? So being able to just use nonverbals in your communications. Has anyone ever done the exercise either through like a work program or just for fun where you pair up with someone and one person talks about something that they're really passionate about? No? It's so fun. It's so fun. So if one person talks about something that they're really passionate about for 1 minute and the other person has a completely flat face, it's so uncomfortable. Because you're getting nothing out of that person, right? And there's no facial expression, there's no acknowledgement, right? You're talking to a brick wall basically, and you're like, you start to question whether what you're passionate about is that person thinking that I'm dumb or something, right? Lots of things go through your mind, especially if you have high sensitivity to emotion, right? So having those nonverbal expressions, right? Just to reflect back to your kids some of the, some of the emotion that they're bringing to you, right? This is why I can never get Botox, because it's going to mess with my concerned therapist face, right? I might try it anyway. But, right? Because we have to emote in some way, right? So when we have these nonverbals, when we have the like, or the, the concerned face, or just the posture, right? All those things send so much communication, right? Again, emotions evolved before language did. So we used to communicate just through facial expressions and body language and posture and all these things, right? And in fact, in this video, it shows how there's so much nonverbal communication with infants, right? They are acquiring so much validation from their environment that it's building a sense of self with them through this mirroring that happens, right? So you remember when the kids were babies, right? And they'd start crying, what would our faces do? Our faces would mirror theirs, right? And be like, oh, honey, I'm so, right? And so we would make the same face that they were making. That's called mirroring. It's biological. We're designed to do it. What that does is it reflects back to the infant, hey, what you're experiencing is valid, right? And their experience is saying like, oh, what I'm feeling is valid. I'm okay. It's okay to feel this way. Yes. Yeah, go for it. Yes, being present. Mm-hmm. Right. So the question is, with being present, is it okay to have some sort of like physical contact for comfort kind of a thing? It depends on the situation, right? Like if they're ready to like, rip your head off, I wouldn't recommend it, right? Or like be present for a little bit and you can read the energy come down and then maybe scooch a little closer, right? The fun part about this, go talk to your family member. Ask them. Say, you know what? I learned about this technique tonight. How would it be for you if I did this next time you were really upset? And they'll tell you, like, absolutely not. Or they'll say, I don't know, right? Which means give it a try and let's see what happens, right? Yeah, yeah. So it can be like a nonverbal of being present to offer physical comfort. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So nonverbals, facial expressions are super powerful. Okay, Mercury is no longer in retrograde, so let's see if this actually works in terms of the video showing. Fingers crossed.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Right? Makes sense? How important those nonverbal communications are, right? So before there's language, before the baby can say, like, "Hey, this is weird. Why aren't you interacting with me?" The mom's still present. She's still there, but she's not doing that reflecting thing, right? So having that reflection and showing those facial expressions in a time where your kid might be really distressed, right? Super important. Super, super important, right? If you have too flat of a face, like sometimes we're like, "Oh no, they're going to blow up. I'm just going to stand here and just try not to have any expression at all so I don't make it worse." Right? We've all done that, right? That often cues them because they can't read you. So what their internal narrative is going to be 10 times worse than what it would be if you were like, right, to just have some sort of facial expression. Again, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to have magic words. You don't have to problem solve it with them. You don't have to know exactly what it is that they're feeling so you can validate it. How could we? Right? But to just to mirror their expression. And this is something they actually teach us in therapy school about mirroring our clients. So if, our clients are like leaning this way and we're trying to like, support them in a particular way, we will mirror them the same way that they're leaning, right? If you go out to dinner with people, watch how people just instinctively mirror each other, right? Have a little science experiment. You pick up your drink and take a sip. Watch what happens. Everybody else is going to pick up their drink and take a sip. It's fun having science experiments on your friends, right? So that's a mirroring thing that we just, as humans innately do. It's a way of bonding. It's a way of connecting. It's a way of being there for each other, right? Make sense? Yes. Okay. So far, these are things that you don't have to say a word. How fantastic, right? You don't need to know the right thing to say. Oh, hang on. Let me go around. Boop. Nope. Let's try that. There we go. Okay. Next level of validation. So each level gets a little bit more deep, more intensive, more intentional, if you will, right? So the next level of validation is something that we call accurate reflection. Okay? So what this is being able to reflect back to your kid or to someone else in your life what it is that they're saying to you with accuracy. So you're not, it's that idea of like listening to understand, not listening to respond, right? So we're not coming up with our response to what the person's saying. We're just trying to make sure that we're hearing what they're saying, right? So in therapy school, the first thing that they teach us is to, after the mirroring, is to say, so let me make sure I hear what you're saying. You're saying blah, 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 right? And it can be the most outrageous thing that they're saying that has no evidence behind it. And you're like, that's not the situation that we're talking about right now, right? But if that's their perspective and we're showing them that we are hearing their perspective, again, it's just hearing them, not agreeing with them, right? Let me make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. You're saying this. Right? And then they're like, yeah. And then they're like, wait a second. You heard me. Right? And then it brings the intensity way down because they know that you heard them because you reflected back to them what they said. Right? Or it might be an opportunity for them to say, no, that's not what I mean. I mean this. Right? And we could get stuck in semantics and say, well, but you really said this. We could. It's not going to help. Right? So my favorite thing to do is to say, oh, okay, I must have misheard you then. So, okay, so this is what you're really saying, right? And they're like, yeah, that's what I mean. And then, okay, excellent. Okay, I hear what you're saying, right? I hear what you're saying. What else is going on? And then we just kind of keep digging for information, right? So when we have the accurate reflection, we're showing people that we're hearing them, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. This one is super, super powerful. So again, you don't have to have the magic words. You don't need to say things in a beautifully organized fashion, right? You don't have to go to therapy school to know what to say. Half the time, we don't know what to say, right? But we know how to reflect really well, right? So to be able to say, all right, so this is what you're telling me. This is what you're feeling. This is what you perceive as the situation going on, right? And they're like, yeah. And to be heard by someone is a really powerful thing, right? Just to feel that connection. You're hearing what I'm saying, and that's fantastic, right? So it's a lot of acknowledgement, it's a lot of acceptance. You may still disagree with them, and that's totally fine, and half the time they expect that. Right? So accurate reflection is not saying, okay, here's your perception of things, and okay, yep, that's what we're going to go with. Nope. But it's going to open their ears. When you show them that you've heard them, it will open their ears to what you might have to say eventually. Okay? Make sense? Yes. So again, no magic words needed. Just reflect back to them what they said to you. Right? This is pretty awesome. So far, so good. We're halfway through, and we don't even have to like generate anything original. Fantastic. Right? Awesome. Okay. The next, we're going to try this. Not about the nail again. We're going to try. Okay. So the next level, a deeper level of validation, is to do one of two things, or sometimes both things, depending. To identify patterns about what your kid is saying, right? So they might be venting about something, and you're doing the nonverbals, and you're staying present, and you're accurately reflecting what it is that they're saying. Now we might have like an original thought to put in there for ourselves. We might be able to say something like, you know, this reminds me of something that happened a couple weeks ago when this situation happened at practice, right? Did that make a connection for you too? Right? And I always ask, like, I'm really curious about this. One of my favorite phrases. I'm curious if, right? Because we don't want to tell them about themselves because we're not in their brains. We don't know what they're actually putting together, right? Sometimes I've said, oh, I'm curious. It reminds me of this situation. Did this pop in your brain at all? And they were like, no. I'm like, oh, okay. Must have just been me. No worries. Keep going, right? And that's okay, right? I validated them. We got through it. Right? So to identify things that might be connected through their experience. What's a particular pattern that might be happening? So this shows that not only am I paying attention, right, through the accurate reflection in this conversation right here, not only am I paying attention to what's happening now, I'm paying attention for time, as time passes, right? Because I'm recalling something that happened last week, last month, last year, right? So I've been paying attention all along, right? So even if we screw it up, even if we get it wrong, right? And remember the data says we only have to get it right about 30% of the time, okay? So even if we get it wrong, we're showing them that, hey, like something is pinging for me about your experience and does this connect? Right? So they'll see that we're in it with them. And not just this one instance, we're in it for the long haul. The other part of this, the speaking the unspoken, is going beyond the accurate reflection in the moment to a deeper level of what might be going on, right? So saying something like, wow, that sounds really confusing, right? If something's going on and they're, frustrated about this and frustrated about that, I'm like, oh, I'm curious, were you really confused by that? I'm kind of confused by that, right? To kind of go a little bit deeper, right? So to speak that unspoken. Or they come home and they're like, sad that, so-and-so didn't talk to them in the hallway or this thing that happened socially, and be like, oh, sounds like you were left out, right? And draw that conclusion, and it gives them the opportunity to say like, yeah, that's what it felt like, right? That they don't have to connect the dots for us necessarily. We're able to do it for them and with them. Sometimes it's things that they hadn't even put together yet themselves, right? And they're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So speaking that unspoken, and it brings that emotion down. So we're going to try. It's not about the nail. Did anybody watch it at home? Yeah, awesome. People did homework. All right.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
I love showing that one at parent group because oftentimes there's some finger pointing going on. Right? So did you see where he identified the unspoken, right? He said, that sounds really hard, right? He wasn't just reflecting back, he was taking it to a deeper level. And that's where she went, yeah, right? And that's the opportunity when their ears open, and then we can start having a conversation about what to do, right? You got to wait until that, like, yeah, happens, right? And it's so frustrating because you just want to pull the nail out of the head, right? And just fix it, right? And, oh, my husband and I had a hot debate about this the other night, right? And I'm like, yes, I know. It would be the easiest thing. And we're not going to get to it until validation happens and the person feels heard, right? And he's like, but that's illogical. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And that's okay. Emotions are not logical, right? That's how they're designed. All right, make sense? Yes. Okay. Nope, we're not going back 5 seconds. There we go. Okay. Normalizing is the next level of validation. So what this is about, and there's a caution flag here. Normalizing is to be able to say to someone that given the context of the situation they're in, it makes sense, like anybody in that situation, or it would be normal in that situation for anyone to be feeling what you're feeling, right? The caution flag here is that for a lot of us, we're trying to connect with our kids. We're trying to tell them, oh, let me tell you about the time that I felt that way too. They don't care. They don't want to hear your life experiences because they're like, you don't understand, right? We've all heard that. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like. And they're not wrong, right? We didn't grow up with this social media situation and in the context of things, just how like politically and environmentally and all this stuff going on. Like, it is a whole different world. We couldn't understand. Even if we were in almost an identical situation as they were, right? They don't want to hear us talk about our experiences. That is not normalizing, right? They're going to, it is for us, and when we talk with adults, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, I had the same thing happen too. This is what happened with me. And we're like, oh my God, that's fantastic. And we're like, yay, bonding, right? That works great with adults. With kids, they hate it, all right? So they're going to say, you're just talking about yourself again, right? So normalizing we have to do with a lot of caution. We're not going to bring our personal experiences into the conversation. So I might say, I might, but I'm not going to say it like, oh, here's my experience with it. I'm going to say, I know someone where this is something that they happen. Or, I read an article this week where they were talking about something similar. Or, I went to this presentation with Karrie and she talked about how this is something kids are dealing with right now, right? So to pull an example from like society at large or different resources, not from your own life experiences. It could even be like, I knew someone with that when I was growing up that they went through XYZ thing. And it might be you, but don't tell them that, right? So it would normalize the situation, right? If your kid's a little bit older, they're starting to drive for the first time. Yeah, it is scary. That's a very scary thing. They're going for their first job interview. Yeah, it is a really like uncomfortable thing. Absolutely. Yeah, job interviews are super scary, right? You'll get the hang of it, right? So to normalize that anyone in that situation would likely feel the same way that your kid's talking about, right? One of my favorite things to say with my kids and with my clients is, yeah, of course you feel that way. Like, I'd be more worried if you didn't feel that way in that situation. And they're like, oh, okay. All right, so it's okay that I feel this way. I'm like, yeah, it's expected. It'd be weird if you didn't. And then they feel okay about how they're feeling, right? Make sense? Yeah, okay, so that's normalizing. Big, big caution flag, though, right? So, of course, if they do come to you and they say, has there ever been a time for you where you felt this way in this kind of a situation? Yes, that's the invitation. Like, it has to come like embossed in a gold platter from the kid to say, like, share with me your life experiences, your wisdom that you've been through. They don't want to hear it until it's like hand delivered, though. So they'll get there. They will, once that frontal lobe is fully formed, right? It's going to be a long process between now and then. Okay, radical genuineness. So this is the deepest level of validation. And we don't want to do this all the time because it could be a lot, right? It can be kind of intense sometimes. So what radical genuineness is it's responding to the situation that's being brought to you, not as the parent who needs to teach them the lesson of life, or the therapist who needs to, utilize this construct or respond in this particular way, but it's responding to them as a human, right? When they come to us with something big or something painful, and we're not trying to like stifle our own reactions to it, right? So in therapy school, they told us it was kind of like, the cardinal sin of being a therapist is crying when your client is, talking about their trauma and they're sobbing, right? And like, we're supposed to like keep it together because it's not supposed to be about us. And don't cry. It'd be the worst thing ever if you cried in front of your client because it's not about you, it's about them, right? And then I was like, but that really feels invalidating, right? If I'm having a physiological experience because I'm a co-crier, right? Like if somebody around me is crying, I'm sobbing, right? The Hallmark card commercials, I'm crying. Sarah McLachlan singing with the ASPCA, sobbing, right? All those, videos, YouTube videos of like soldiers returning home and surprising their family. Oh my God, I'm a mess, right? So I can't not, right? So the idea of me trying to like stuff it and stifle it is actually me as a human being inauthentic with my client or with my kid, right? So radical genuineness is being authentic in how you're responding to the situation, right? Being your true self, not feeling like you have to put a professional spin on it or something like that, right? So people have seen Good Will Hunting, that movie. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, yeah. And so if you remember the scene where the professor's taking Will to all these different psychologists who are like, pillars in their field, and, they're very like stuffy and wearing suits and doing all this stuff. And Will's like, this is bull crap, man, right? And because it was inauthentic to him, right? It wasn't someone being, genuine and honest with him and being their true selves with him in the room, right? It means that we need to be a little vulnerable. We need to be a little open. And so, the cool thing about the therapy that I do, DBT, is that it encourages authenticity and it encourages genuineness. So they want us to be who we truly are. So I deal with a bunch of teenagers all day long. And so like some pretty interesting things come out of my mouth that they did not teach in therapy school, right? But like by me authentically being myself, it creates a different bond, right, between me and my client, right, with boundaries, obviously, right? But we want to have that genuineness in, the situations where it counts, right? So I had a client who text messaged me. She moved out of state, went to college. I was a little unsure how it was going to go. And she text messaged me. She was supposed to have started with other therapists because I wasn't licensed where she went. And she text messaged me this whole 3 pages of stuff that she was dealing with. And it was like, boom, big thing, huge thing, huge thing, huge thing, campus security and people going missing and having to break into people's rooms and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And my response to her was all caps, holy shitballs. They did not teach me that in therapy school, right? But that was me being authentic in reading this whole massive list of stuff that she was dealing with, right? I wasn't being I need to give her the most clinical response here, right? I needed to be a human. And she came back for winter break, and she told me that after that exchange where I was authentic like that, she had some really dark thoughts and urges and plans, and that connection with me made her turn around, right? So it's that authenticity, that being human, that human-to-human connection, right? Not, I'm trying to be the best clinician possible, right? I was being the best human I could be, given the context, right? So that's radical genuineness. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. And we don't want to do it all the time because that would be a lot, right? So, all right. So those are the levels of validation. So all kinds of different things to try out. So this is fun. Okay. There's a handout on the little ledge there on your way out that is this, so you can feel free to take this with you, a copy of this with you. These are things to what not to say that we say with the best of intentions, right? We say out of the kindness of our hearts, trying to support, trying to connect, trying to make our kids feel better. And for some of our kids, it works. If we don't have a highly sensitive kid, hearing I understand is great. Fantastic. Job well done, right? For a high sensitivity kid, right? Read every middle schooler ever, right? If you say, I understand, they're going to be like, you don't understand, right? Right. They're going to hear it as an invalidation, even though that wasn't the intention, right? So, these might be things that you have said, it's okay. Don't invalidate yourself. You're doing the best you can, right? We're all learning, right? So I understand minimizes. They interpret it as a minimization. You should be happy that my husband, who's going to watch this YouTube video later and joked about how many times I threw him under the bus last time. You should be happy that. That's negating, right? We're telling someone how they should feel instead of validating how they actually feel, right? Don't be sad, it's okay. We're trying to comfort. What they hear is they shouldn't feel what they're feeling, all right? What's the reason why you're so upset? They don't know. They don't know. There is no reason. Sometimes the emotions are just going bananas, right? There's no easy fix. I wish there was. So sometimes we just need to get in there and feel the feelings, and they'll fade over time, and they'll be like, what just happened? And you'll be like, I don't know. And we made it. We did it. We got through it, right? So it gives the impression that we're trying to fix the situation. So it's not that big a deal. Calm down, take a deep breath, take a walk. Sometimes we try to offer these skills and say, okay, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, right? Great ideas, fantastic. The high sensitivity kid might hear, fix your feelings, right? And so we want to give them the opportunity to feel your feelings first, and then we can, when you feel that shift, like that mom who sat for 20 minutes just being present with her kid, there was a shift. When you feel that shift, that's when you can go into problem solving with your kid. Right? There's no reason to feel that way. When I was your age, this is normal in a dismissive way, right? That's the cautionary. You're doing this to yourself. You're too sensitive. You shouldn't be depressed. You have everything. They know they have everything, and they're still depressed. And so it doesn't make sense in their brains. And it doesn't make sense, right? Again, emotions don't make sense half the time, right? I just want you to be happy, right? That happiness narrative, right, does sometimes puts more pressure on than being beneficial. So this is a list of things that I like to use with my kids, with my clients. And if you take this sheet home to your kid or to your family members, which I highly recommend, and you show them this list and you say what on this side would actually be like nails on a chalkboard, because just because it's on the list doesn't mean that they're going to interpret it as as validating. And some things on this list, they'd be like, oh no, that's totally cool. I appreciate that, right? So it's very individual and specific, right? So take this list to them and say what things would actually be, would you feel validated by me saying, and what things extra would work, right? Let me make sure I hear what you're saying. That's the accurate reflection, right? To summarize, to say, okay, like, let me make sure I'm picking up what you're putting down, right? It makes sense that you would feel that way. You don't even have to name the emotion, right? It makes sense that you would feel that way. Fantastic. Were you feeling upset when that happened? Were you feeling nervous when that happened? So you can kind of like float something. I always like to pose it as a question because you might be off base, and that's okay, right? Again, you don't have to get it right every single time. I can see how that would be so upsetting. I see where you're coming from. That makes sense because, right, and that, tying that pattern, right, makes sense because this thing happened similarly like last week, and we've been talking about this a lot, right? I can see how this is impacting you. This must have been really tough. Tell me more. One of my favorite interventions. Tell me more about that. I'm really curious about that. Tell me more, right? And it brings more conversation, and then you have the opportunity to reflect back more and validate, right? I would have felt upset too in that situation, normalizing. It sounds like you're feeling ashamed, am I right? Again, pose it as a question. I know how important that was to you. That stinks, and I can see how hard you're working, right? All those things, I interpret as validating statements. Sometimes my kids do not, right? And then the silence and the nonverbals go a long way too, right? When in doubt, just mirror, okay? So again, this is on handouts on the way out. Feel free. Things to remember: validate the emotion, not the behavior. It's okay to say, yes, it makes sense that you're upset, and you cannot punch a hole in the wall, right? Those two things can be true at the same time. You can validate the emotion and set a limit on the behavior at the same time. That's okay to do. Don't validate the invalid, right? You don't have to agree with, I gave my example last time about, I can validate that someone might be seeing orange cupcakes in the sky, and that's their experience, right? But I'm not going to say, yeah, oh, I see them too, right? But I can validate that I hear you say that you're perceiving this, right? And is that kind of scary? What's going on there, right? I can validate that. If they're still upset, if they're still going, keep validating, right? Just because you said that makes sense that you feel that way doesn't mean like, okay, we can move on to problem solving, right? If they're still going, keep validating. You'll feel the shift in the conversation when they're ready to talk about problem solving, okay? And it's going to be weird. They're going to say you're being weird, and you're going to be like, this feels weird, and everything's weird, right? And that's okay. Validate it. This is weird, isn't it? We're doing weird things. This is a whole new process. It's weird. Until it won't be weird, right? You just got to keep going with it. All right? All right, questions? Anyone have questions or situations or ideas or want to try something? A situation. Yeah. Do you want the mic or do you want to? Okay, you don't want the mic. Okay. I'll repeat it for the people who are listening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Electronics. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Right. 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 So how do we go from the validation of, with the electronics? Of course you're frustrated that I want you to stop, playing and it's time to do something different. And the kid is saying, well, if you know I feel this way, why are you being mean to me and making me stop? Yeah? Relatable. Right? So to go into and say, yeah, you can be mad at me. That's okay. You can be mad at me. I'm all right with being the bad guy here, right? And I'm your parent, and I know that too much electronics is not going to impact your brain that great. We're focusing on distractibility. We need to do something else in the house, right? And you're not going to like it, and that's okay. You can be mad, right? We can be the bad guy, right? And like I said a time or two ago, if they say that they hate us, it means we're doing our job right? We can take it, right? And we can validate and have them be mad at us at the same time. And they'll be like, this feels weird. And it will feel weird, right? So, yeah, you can be mad at me. I'm okay if you're mad at me. Yep, I know. It's like when we take them to go get their shots, right? Or we make them eat their veggies, right? They don't like it, most of them, right? And we're still like, this is something that we need to do to keep you healthy. You don't see it right now because you're 8, and this is what we got to do. And you can be mad. Does that make sense? Yeah. It sucks. Anyone else? Any other situations? Yeah. Yes. Timing. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. So when the kid really wants to like get into it with you and you're like, okay, this is getting too much. We need to, bring the temperature down a little bit. And they're like, no, we're going for it, basically. Right. They get mad that you're trying to say, no, we're not talking about it. Well, we can validate the intensity of the emotion and say, I can see how upset you are about this, 100%. And you can do a little bit of mirroring, right? And say, yeah, you are so wound up about this. I can see how much this is hurting you. I can see how painful this is for you. Absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about this with you, right? Right now, the intensity's here. We got to bring it down to here so we can have a conversation that's not going to be like really, highly impulsive and, big emotions and things like this. So it's okay for you to feel this way. And sometimes if they just need to like let it out and we just kind of got to receive it, that's okay, right? And sometimes we got to let them kind of blow off the steam, right? And we can validate and we can mirror and you just do the nonverbals, right? And it'll end eventually, right? They might go on for a while and then they'll kind of fade out and then you'll be like, okay, all right, let's breathe for a little bit. That's a lot. And then you can reflect back and then, and then be able to turn it to a conversation. But sometimes just letting them go is okay. It's all right. And to sit and be present instead of trying to shut it down. Right? Make sense? Yeah. And it's exhausting. And the next time, Oh, it happens at the worst time. You're trying to get out the door. You've got a report that you're working on, right? So, yeah. Yep. So have the conversation with them in advance and say, listen, this is the pattern that we're doing. What can we do in advance next time so it doesn't end up being this thing that disrupts the whole evening, right? How can we do this differently? Go toward them, right? This is the not walking on eggshells part. Say, okay, this is the pattern. This is what's been going on, and I want to try to do something different because this is exhausting for me. I'm sure it's exhausting for you too. Right? Yes. Awesome. Let me check my phone to see if anybody texted. Nope. Nothing for here. Any other questions or situations? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, timing. Yep. Right. So if you have to leave at a certain time and things start bubbling up, right? So what have you been doing? Right. Like you have to go, right? This isn't a good time. Yep. Pick a different time. Right. Right. How do they take that? Yeah, gets mad and yells loud. Yeah. As one might expect, right? Have you approached and said, "Hey, listen, this is a pattern." Right? Like I got to I have a prior commitment. I got to head out. This is a thing. And I feel, and we can validate ourselves and model ourselves, I feel, really worried about you, right? I feel really upset that we weren't able to have this conversation, right? I think about you the whole time I'm out. Is there a way that you can let me know earlier in the day if things are starting to bubble up, right? It's that whole idea of listen to it when it's whispering so it doesn't have to scream, right? How can you let me know earlier, right? Because I like to say my psychic abilities are on the fritz, right? I'm really trying to win the Powerball and it's just not clicking for me yet, so my psychic powers aren't working, right? So I don't know when things are bubbling up for you. So how can you let me know earlier? Because I want to know. I want to be here. I want to validate you. I want to do this stuff to support you, right? And I can't do it in half an hour, right? So acknowledging the limitations, right? And is there a set of skills or strategies or things that you guys can have built up in advance? Like sometimes we have like a coping skills toolkit kind of a thing for some of our clients, and do the best you can for validation, point them to the toolkit, and then kind of circle back once you get home, right? And have some plans in place, right? What's a movie you can watch? What's a podcast you can listen to? What can you do while I'm out, right? Make sense? Yeah. Yep. Awesome. All right. Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Karrie.
Evening. Thank you.
We're so glad you could share all of this knowledge with all of us. We're all going to be
Happy.
experts.
Yes. My pleasure.
Right. So we want to thank you very much for taking time out of your days to come and share your wealth of knowledge with all of us. If you need links to the previous presentations, they are on the district website. I just put them there on the health and wellness page. If you go there, it's the first thing you'll see when you click on that health and wellness tab on the district webpage, and it will be sent out by Mr. Martineau probably next Friday when we get the recording of this one. So again, thank you to the Southborough Health Department again for supporting us in this endeavor. If you have questions, we've had Dr. Lipton O'Connor, who is our SEL coordinator for the district, has been here with us. If you have questions for her or myself, our emails. We're available all the time via email. If you have ideas for other presentations that you'd like to see that can help us all be those caring adults in our child's lives and support them as best we can, just reach out to us and we'll do the best we can to get those to you. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to come. We're so happy you came. Have a great night.